midnight on Highway 23. A child's blood-stained baseball jersey would turn Officer Sarah Martinez's routine traffic stop into a parent's darkest nightmare. "He has my sister in the trunk." 4 whispered words from a trembling 7-year-old boy. Through her flashlight beam, Sarah spotted the pink backpack from tonight's Amber Alert partially hidden under a blanket, still dripping red. The driver's cold smile never wavered as his hand gripped the boy's shoulder. The same smile from the security footage of 6 other missing children across 3 states. But before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe because I have something really special for you tomorrow. And now, back to the video. 3:17 a.m. The kind of darkness that swallows hope. Detective Emma Rodriguez knew the call would change everything before she even picked up the phone. Dispatch didn't use that tone for routine cases. Not at this hour, not with that edge of barely contained panic. 4 words, the dispatcher said. Just 4 words. The abandoned warehouse district. Industrial. Cold. The kind of place where nightmares are born and secrets die. A little girl, no more than 7, standing alone under a single flickering streetlight. Blood on her hands. Not hers. Someone else's. Her words would unravel an entire network that had been hunting children for years. "They sell my friends." Those 4 words would trigger a manhunt that would expose the darkest trafficking operation the state had ever seen. An underground network that had operated in plain sight for decades, preying on the most vulnerable, turning children into commodities. Emma had spent 15 years hunting predators. She'd seen the worst humanity could offer. But this was different. The girl's eyes weren't just scared, they were weaponized. A witness, a survivor, a key that would unlock a nightmare bigger than anyone could imagine. In the next 72 hours, everything would change. A city would be torn apart, powerful people would fall, and a system designed to protect the vulnerable would be exposed for the broken machine it had become. This isn't just another case file. This is a war, and it starts with 4 words from a child who refused to be silenced. The first rays of dawn crawled across Emma Rodriguez's apartment like hesitant witnesses. Photographs lined the far wall, a memorial disguised as a case file. Missing children, some found, too many never were. She'd been awake for hours. The case files spread across her kitchen table like a twisted mosaic of human suffering. 15 years on the Crimes Against Children task force had taught her one thing. Monsters wore business suits as often as they wore masks. The coffee had gone cold. Again. Outside, Los Angeles was waking up. The City of Angels, they called it. Emma knew better. This was a city of broken promises, of children who disappeared between the cracks of a system designed to protect, but often failed. Her phone buzzed. "Captain Michael Reyes, tell me you've got something," he said without preamble. Emma's fingers traced the latest file. 6 missing children from 3 different neighborhoods. No apparent connection, no ransom demands, just gone. "The girl from last night," she responded, her voice low. "She's different." The story of Emma Rodriguez wasn't written in her official personnel file. It was etched in the scars she carried, both visible and invisible. 23 years ago, she'd been that little girl, the one who saw something she shouldn't, the one who spoke when everyone else stayed silent. Her younger sister Maria had not been so lucky. Growing up in the foster system, Emma learned quickly that silence was a predator's best weapon, that the system designed to protect children was often more broken than the children themselves. She'd become a detective to change that, to be the voice for those who couldn't speak. The incident from last night replayed in her mind. The little girl, those 4 words. "They sell my friends." Each word was a key, a weapon, a promise. Captain Reyes waited on the line, the weight of his own history hanging between them. They'd worked together for a decade, 2 veterans who'd seen too much, who knew the darkness that lived just beneath the city's polished surface. "The forensics team is pulling evidence from the warehouse," he said. "But you know how these cases go. Powerful people, connections." Emma's hand unconsciously touched the small scar behind her left ear, a reminder of her own past, a story she'd never fully told. "Not this time," she said quietly. The wall of photographs seemed to watch her. Missing faces, forgotten children, each one a promise she'd made years ago. Her apartment was more than a living space. It was a war room, maps with colored pins, timeline charts, connection boards that looked like conspiracy theories but were meticulously documented investigations. Some called it obsession. Emma called it justice. The coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, connecting dots that most investigators would miss. The warehouse, the girl, the network. Something was different this time. She could feel it in her bones. Outside, Los Angeles continued its morning routine. Traffic building, people rushing, the city moving forward, oblivious to the war being waged. In the shadows, Emma Rodriguez was about to drag those shadows into the light, one child at a time. The first rays of dawn crawled across Emma Rodriguez's apartment like hesitant witnesses. Photographs lined the far wall, a memorial disguised as a case file. Missing children. Some found. Too many never were. She'd been awake for hours, the case files spread across her kitchen table like a twisted mosaic of human suffering. 15 years on the crimes against children. Task Force had taught her one thing: monsters wore business suits as often as they wore masks. The coffee had gone cold, again. Outside, Los Angeles was waking up. The city of angels, they called it. Emma knew better. This was a city of broken promises, of children who disappeared between the cracks of a system designed to protect, but often failed. Her phone buzzed. Captain Michael Reyes. "Tell me you've got something," he said, without preamble. Emma's fingers traced the latest file. 6 missing children from 3 different neighborhoods. No apparent connection, no ransom demands. Just gone. "The girl from last night," she responded, her voice low. "She's different." The story of Emma Rodriguez wasn't written in her official personnel file. It was etched in the scars she carried, both visible and invisible. 23 years ago, she'd been that little girl. The one who saw something she shouldn't. The one who spoke when everyone else stayed silent. Her younger sister Maria had not been so lucky. Growing up in the foster system, Emma learned quickly that silence was a predator's best weapon, that the system designed to protect children was often more broken than the children themselves. She'd become a detective to change that, to be the voice for those who couldn't speak. The incident from last night replayed in her mind. The little girl, those 4 words. They sell my friends. Each word was a key, a weapon, a promise. Captain Reyes waited on the line, the weight of his own history hanging between them. They'd worked together for a decade, 2 veterans who'd seen too much, who knew the darkness that lived just beneath the city's polished surface. "The forensics team is pulling evidence from the warehouse," he said. "But you know how these cases go. Powerful people, connections." Emma's hand unconsciously touched the small scar behind her left ear, a reminder of her own past. A story she'd never fully told. "Not this time," she said quietly. The wall of photographs seemed to watch her. Missing faces, forgotten children, each one a promise she'd made years ago. Her apartment was more than a living space. It was a war room, maps with colored pins, timeline charts, connection boards that looked like conspiracy theories but were meticulously documented investigations. Some called it obsession. Emma called it justice. The coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, connecting dots that most investigators would miss. The warehouse, the girl, the network. Something was different this time. She could feel it in her bones. Outside Los Angeles continued its morning routine. Traffic building, people rushing, the city moving forward, oblivious to the war being waged. In the shadows, Emma Rodriguez was about to drag those shadows into the light. One child at a time. The forensics lab felt like a tomb. Sterile, cold, unforgiving. Dr. Marcus Chen stood behind the glass, his hands pressed against the observation window. The little girl, the one who'd spoken those 4 world-changing words, sat in the interview room. She looked small, fragile, but her eyes burned with something far beyond her years. Emma Rodriguez entered the room, her movements deliberate, calculated. She'd interviewed hundreds of traumatized children. Each one left a mark. Each one changed her. this one would be different. "My name is Detective Rodriguez," she began, sliding into the chair across from the girl. "What's your name?" Silence. The girl's fingers traced patterns on the table, intricate, precise, almost like a code. "I know you're scared," Emma continued, her voice soft, professional, but underneath, a current of steel. "No one here is going to hurt you." A lie, and not a lie. The girl looked up. Her eyes, deep brown, almost black, held a wisdom that shouldn't exist in a child. "They'll find me," she whispered. Emma leaned forward, barely a movement, but in that moment, everything changed. "Who will find?" "You." The girl's hand moved, a pattern, a symbol traced on the metal table. 3 quick lines, a circle, another line. Dr. Chen's breath caught in his throat. He'd seen that symbol before, buried in files, classified reports, connections that shouldn't exist. "My name is Lily," the girl said, "and they sell children like me." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Outside the interview room, the world continued. Traffic moved, people worked, children played. But here, something was breaking open. Captain Michael Reyes watched the interview feed. His coffee going cold. 30 years on the force, and he'd never seen anything like this. The girl, Lily, was more than a witness. She was a key. Emma's hand rested near Lily's, not touching, just close enough to offer protection without overwhelming her. "Tell me about the symbol," Emma said. Lily's fingers stopped tracing. Her eyes, those impossible eyes, locked with Emma's. "You won't understand," she said. No one ever does. The forensics lab had seen thousands of interviews, hundreds of cases, but none like this. Dr. Chen's computer blinked. A message, encrypted. The symbol Lily had drawn. It matched something. In a database that shouldn't exist. Classified, buried, forgotten, until now. "Try me," Emma responded. Lily took a deep breath. The kind of breath that comes before telling a story that will change everything. "It started," she said, "with a warehouse, and children who nobody would miss." Captain Reyes felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He'd seen that look before. The moment before a case breaks wide open. Before the world discovers something it was never meant to know. Emma Rodriguez knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning. Outside, Los Angeles continued, oblivious, indifferent, to the storm that was about to break. One little girl, 4 words, an entire network, about to be exposed. The game had just changed. The walls of the secure safe house seemed to close in with each passing hour. Lily hadn't spoken since that first interview. Not a word. But her eyes, those impossibly knowing eyes, they never stopped watching. Analyzing. Calculating. Dr. Marcus. Chen had brought in a specialized child psychologist, Dr. Elena Ramirez, who specialized in trauma cases involving severe child trafficking. Her credentials were impeccable, Harvard-trained, years of work with international rescue organizations, but even she looked unsettled. "This isn't typical," Dr. Ramirez told Emma and Captain Reyes in the small conference room adjacent to Lily's. "Secure room. The level of psychological protection she's constructed. It's unlike anything I've seen." Emma watched through the one-way glass. Lily sat perfectly still, her small fingers tracing patterns on the white hospital-grade blanket, patterns that looked like nothing, and everything. "She knows something," Emma said. It wasn't a question. Captain Reyes pulled out a thick file. Old, worn, the kind of file that carried weight beyond its physical presence. "Your sister's case," he said quietly. It was never fully closed. The room went silent. Maria Rodriguez disappeared 30 years ago, a case that had haunted Emma's entire career, the reason she'd become a detective, the wound that never healed. "What are you saying?" Emma's voice was steel. Reyes spread photographs across the table, missing children, dozens of them. Spanning decades, a pattern emerged, not just in the disappearances, but in something else, something subtle, a symbol, the same one Lily had drawn. "We've been looking at this wrong," Dr. Chen interrupted. spreading digital images across a large touchscreen. These aren't random disappearances. This is a system. Organized, precise. The images told a story. Children from different backgrounds, different cities, different years, but connected by invisible threads. Wealthy neighborhoods, foster care and systems, immigrant communities. No single demographic was safe. They're choosing children, Dr. Ramirez said, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. Not randomly. Specifically. Emma's mind raced. Her sister's case, the pattern, Lily's impossible knowledge. A secure phone rang, the kind of phone that only rang with information that could change everything. Captain Reyes answered. His face went stone cold. Another child, he said, just reported missing. Matching the exact profile, the room held its breath. Lily looked up, directly at the one-way glass, as if she could see right through it, as if she'd been expecting this moment. Dr. Chen's computer pinged, an encrypted message. The symbol Lily had drawn began to decode, not as a symbol, but as a complex geographical tracking system. This goes deeper than trafficking, he muttered. This looks like something else entirely. Emma's hand unconsciously touched the small scar behind her ear, the one from her childhood, the one that always ached when something big was about to break. We need more, she said. Lily smiled. Not a child's smile, something else entirely. The game was changing, and they were just beginning to understand the rules. The encrypted file arrived at 2:17 a.m., digital breadcrumbs that should never have existed. Fragments of data that would unravel everything they thought they knew. Dr. Marcus Chen's hands trembled as he decrypted the files, not from fear, from something closer to revelation. The symbol Lily had drawn wasn't just a tracking system, it was a map, a blueprint of something far more terrifying than child trafficking. Governmental black sites, classified research facilities, interconnected networks that stretched across continents. And at the center of it all, children, not as victims, as something else entirely. Emma Rodriguez burst into the forensics lab, her eyes wild. "We've got a problem," she said, before seeing Chen's face. "What?" He turned the screen, slowly. Genetic modification reports, psychological profiling. Children, tracked from birth, selected, processed, transformed. "This isn't trafficking," Chen whispered. "This is harvesting." The pieces started to click. Lily's impossible knowledge, the precise selection of children, the network that seemed to transcend normal criminal operations. A phone rang. "Captain Reyes, they know we're close," he said. "No hello, no introduction, just fact." Emma's mind raced. Her sister Maria, the children who'd disappeared, the pattern that had haunted her entire career. Not a coincidence, a design. Lily sat in the secure room, watching, waiting. She knew something was coming. The first explosion rocked the building at 3:42 a.m. Tactical teams, black vehicles, no insignia, moving with military precision. They weren't here to capture, they were here to eliminate. Everything, every file, every record, every trace, and everyone who knew too much. The warehouse loomed like a monster against the pre-dawn Los Angeles skyline. Emma Rodriguez checked her weapon. Glock 19, fully loaded, backup magazine, every movement precise, calculated. Captain Reyes spoke into his radio, coordinating a multi-agency task force that shouldn't exist. FBI, CIA, Homeland Security, local law enforcement, everyone who understood what was truly at stake. "We're not just stopping a trafficking ring," he'd briefed them hours earlier. "We're exposing a system that's been hiding in plain sight for decades." Dr. Marcus Chen had spent the night piecing together the impossible puzzle. The children weren't just victims. They were subjects, experimental subjects in a program so deeply classified it made Black Ops look like public record. Lily sat in the armored vehicle, her small frame belying the intelligence that burned in her eyes. She wasn't a witness anymore. She was a weapon. "They'll try to stop us," she said to Emma. Not a warning, a statement of fact. The first wave hit before they even breached the warehouse perimeter. Tactical teams in unmarked black gear, no insignia, no identifiers, moving with a precision that spoke of something beyond standard military training. Emma's earpiece crackled. Multiple hostiles incoming. They know we're coming. The firefight erupted like a sudden storm. Precision shots, counter moves, that seemed almost choreographed. This wasn't a standard confrontation. This was a surgical strike designed to protect something far more valuable than human lives. Dr. Elena Ramirez worked frantically, decrypting the last of the files they'd recovered. Each document revealed another layer of the nightmare. Children, selected, tracked, modified, not just trafficked, engineered. Lily moved differently from the other children they'd rescued. Her awareness, her understanding, something was fundamentally different. "I was the first successful prototype," she said, quietly to Emma, "but not the last." The warehouse was a fortress. Layers of security that went beyond physical barriers, electronic countermeasures, psychological deterrents. This was designed to keep something in, or something out. Captain Reyes took a bullet to the shoulder, kept moving. "Push forward," he shouted. "We're close to something big." Dr. Chen's decryption program broke through the final firewall, a database that would change everything. Names, locations, genetic modification programs dating back decades. Children who weren't just missing, children who had been transformed into something else entirely. Emma's sister Maria, her disappearance. Suddenly it all made sense. Not a random tragedy, part of a larger design. The final room, reinforced, sealed. Lily stepped forward. Her small hand touched the electronic lock. It opened. Inside, rows of stasis pods. Children, some young, some older, all connected to systems that monitored every aspect of their biological and psychological state. "This is what they've been protecting," Lily said. The truth was worse than anyone could have imagined. This wasn't just about trafficking. This was about creating something new, something that would change everything. Emma Rodriguez had spent her entire career hunting monsters. She'd never imagined she'd find them creating an entirely new kind of human. The first rays of dawn broke through the warehouse windows. Everything was about to change. 1 week later, the press conference was a carefully orchestrated dance of partial truths and calculated revelations. Emma Rodriguez stood beside Captain Reyes, her hand unconsciously touching the file that would change everything and nothing. A significant trafficking network has been dismantled, the FBI director announced, his carefully pressed suit a stark contrast to the weight of the words he was delivering. Multiple suspects are in custody. The investigation continues. Lies. All of it. Dr. Marcus Chen sat in the back of the room, watching. The real story would never see the light of day, not entirely. Some truths were too dangerous. Lily, no longer just a witness but the key to everything, remained in protective custody. But everyone in that room knew she was no ordinary child. The stasis pods, the genetic modifications, the children who were more than children. They'd saved some, not all. And the network, it wasn't destroyed, just pushed back into the shadows. Captain Reyes winced. The bullet wound was healing, but something else was breaking. 30 years of believing in the system, shattered in a single week. "We've only seen the tip of the iceberg," he muttered to Emma during a break in the press conference. She knew. Her sister Maria. The missing piece that had haunted her entire life. Now she understood. Not a victim. Part of something larger. Something they were only beginning to comprehend. Dr. Elena Ramirez had compiled a report. Classified. Top secret. Eyes only. The kind of document that would disappear almost as soon as it was created. Genetic markers. Psychological profiles. Children selected. Not randomly, but with surgical precision. "They're creating something," she told Emma in private. "Not just modifying. Creating." The press conference continued. Carefully worded statements. Promises of justice. Hollow sounds that meant nothing to those who knew the truth. Lily watched from a secure location. Her eyes, those impossible eyes, held in a knowledge that went beyond her years. "This is just the beginning," she told Emma. A promise, a warning. The file in Emma's hand, marked classified, containing truths that would never see the light of day, her sister's file. The first piece of a puzzle that stretched back decades. Outside, Los Angeles moved on. People went to work, children played in parks. The world continued, oblivious to the war that had been fought in the shadows, but something had changed. The network was wounded, not destroyed, and they would be back. Emma Rodriguez looked at the file. At the photo of her sister taken decades ago, some stories never truly end. They just wait to begin again, 30 days later. The safe house wasn't a typical facility. Located in the high desert of Nevada, it was more of a research center disguised as a rehabilitation facility. Chain-link fences, multiple security checkpoints, the kind of place that didn't exist on any official map. Lily sat in a room that was part classroom, part observation chamber. Monitors tracked her every movement, biological readings, psychological responses, neural activity. She was studying, but not like other children. Advanced quantum mechanics textbooks lay open. Complex genetic research papers, psychological profiles that would challenge most PhD candidates. Her small fingers traced equations with a precision that defied her apparent age. Dr. Elena Ramirez watched from behind the one-way glass, her medical tablet continuously updating with real-time data. "She's not just adapting," she muttered to Dr. Marcus Chen. "She's evolving." Chen nodded. The genetic markers they'd discovered were unlike anything in medical literature. Not a mutation, not a modification, something entirely different. Emma Rodriguez had been granted limited access. Officially, she was part of the protective detail. In reality, she was the only one who seemed to understand that Lily was more than a subject, more than a witness, a connection. Her phone buzzed. A message from Captain Reyes, encrypted, classified. 3 more children had been identified. Similar genetic markers, similar backgrounds, but scattered across the country. A network that was rebuilding, reforming. The trafficking ring they'd dismantled was just the surface. Something much larger was taking shape. In another part of the facility, a secure server room hummed with activity. Thousands of encrypted files, cross-referenced, data, connections that stretched across continents. Lily looked up, directly at the observation window. Her eyes, those impossible eyes, seemed to see everything and nothing. "They're coming back," she said, not to anyone in particular. A statement of fact. Dr. Ramirez's tablet pinged. An anomalous reading. Lily's neural activity had spiked, but not in fear, in anticipation. Emma understood something the others didn't. This wasn't about Lily being a victim, or a subject, or even a weapon. She was a key to what nobody knew. The files recovered from the warehouse told a story that defied conventional understanding. Children selected with impossible precision, genetic lines traced back generations, psychological profiles that suggested something beyond human comprehension. A phone rang in a secure communications center, a number that didn't officially exist. "They've located 2 more, a voice said. "Clinical. Detached." The response came back. "Immediately. Proceed with extraction." Outside the Nevada facility, the desert stretched endlessly. Quiet. Waiting. Something was coming, and Lily was at the center of it all. Emma Rodriguez knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was far from over. The game was just beginning. 60 days. After everything changed, the world continued. People went to work, children played in parks, seasons changed. Nobody knew how close they'd come to something that would rewrite everything they understood about human potential. Deep beneath, the Nevada desert, in a facility that didn't exist on any official map, the true story was still unfolding. Lily sat in a room that was equal parts laboratory, classroom, and psychological observation chamber. The walls were lined with screens, some displaying complex mathematical equations, others showing real-time biological readings that would baffle most medical professionals. Dr. Elena Ramirez watched, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that tracked every microscopic change in Lily's biological and neurological systems. What they'd discovered went far beyond genetic modification. This was something else entirely. Cellular regeneration at 427% above baseline human capacity, she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. Neural pathway formation occurring at exponential rates. Dr. Marcus Chen reviewed the genetic sequencing data. The markers they discovered defied current scientific understanding. Not a mutation, not an adaptation. Something that suggested intentional, precise engineering on a level that bordered on the impossible. Emma Rodriguez stood in the observation room. her hand unconsciously touching the small scar behind her ear, the legacy of a past that was now making terrifying sense. Her sister Maria, the missing piece that had haunted her entire life. Not a victim, a prototype. The first, a secure communication terminal blinked, encrypted messages from sources that technically didn't exist. Captain Reyes had been working overtime, tracing the network they'd partially exposed. "It's bigger than we thought," he told Emma in their last secured conversation. "This isn't just about trafficking. This is about creating something new." The recovered files told a story that unfolded like a nightmare. Children selected with impossible precision. Genetic lines traced back generations. Psychological profiles that suggested capabilities far beyond normal human potential. Lily looked up, directly at the observation window. She wasn't just watching, she was analyzing, calculating. "They're rebuilding," she said quietly. Not a question, a statement of fact. The facility hummed with activity. Secure, isolated, a world unto itself. 12 other children had been identified. Similar markers, similar backgrounds, scattered across the country. A network that was reforming, reshaping itself. Dr. Ramirez's tablet showed something extraordinary. Lily's brain was creating neural connections at a rate that defied medical understanding, not just learning. Evolving. A secure phone rang, the kind of phone that only rang with information that could change everything. "We've identified 2 more, a voice said, clinical, detached. The response came back immediately. "Proceed with extraction." Outside, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly. Quiet, waiting. Emma Rodriguez understood something the others didn't. This wasn't about Lily being a victim, or a subject, or even a weapon. She was a key to what nobody knew. But someone had a plan. In a secure data center thousands of miles away, a lone figure reviewed the latest intelligence. Maps, genetic profiles, psychological assessments. The kind of information that could topple governments, reshape humanity. Director Helena Winters. Officially, she didn't exist. In reality, she was the architect of something far larger than anyone could comprehend. The children weren't just subjects, they were the next stage. A phone call, encrypted, untraceable. "Phase 2 is ready to commence." The voice on the other end didn't respond. Didn't need to. Some plans were too big for words. Back in the Nevada facility, Lily continued her study. Quantum mechanics textbooks lay open, complex genetic research. Papers spread across her workspace. Her small fingers traced equations with a precision that would challenge most PhD candidates. But she was thinking about something else. The network they'd partially dismantled. The connections that stretched across continents. The children who were more than children. They were coming back, and this time, they would be prepared. Emma watched through the one-way glass. Her entire career had been leading to this moment. The search for her sister. The investigation into missing children. The conspiracy that went deeper than anyone could imagine. Something was coming, and Lily was at the center of it all. The desert wind whispered against the facility's reinforced walls. A promise, a warning. This was far from over. The game was just beginning. Conclusion. The threads of destiny. The story of Emma Rodriguez, Lily, and the intricate network of hidden truths is more than a tale of child trafficking or governmental conspiracy. It is a profound exploration of human potential, the nature of protection, and the thin line between salvation and manipulation. Emma Rodriguez stood at the crossroads of personal tragedy and systemic revelation. Her sister, Maria's disappearance, had been the wound that drove her entire career, a pain that now transformed into understanding. The children they discovered were not just victims, they were something more, potential, promise, a generation, engineered to be something beyond conventional human limitations. Lily represented the culmination of decades of secret research. Not a weapon, not a subject, but a key to understanding the next stage of human evolution. The network they'd partially exposed was just the beginning. Director Helena Winters and her hidden architects had set in motion a plan that transcended traditional concepts of human capability. The children with their extraordinary genetic markers were not an accident. They were a design. Dr. Elena Ramirez and Dr. Marcus Chen continued their research. knowing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Each genetic sequence, each neural pathway revealed a truth more complex than any single scientific discipline could explain. Captain Michael Reyes, wounded but unbroken, understood that the battle they'd fought was merely the first skirmish in a much larger war. The connections they'd uncovered stretched across continents, through generations, beyond the comprehension of ordinary investigative processes. 4 words from a child had unraveled a conspiracy decades in the making. They sell my friends. Those words had become a catalyst, a moment of revelation that would change everything. The children they'd rescued, Lily and the others, represented more than survivors. They were pioneers. Prototypes of a potential future where human capability could be deliberately, scientifically, engineered, but at what cost? Emma Rodriguez knew the true victory wasn't in dismantling a trafficking network. It was in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, in giving voice to the voiceless, in understanding that true strength lies not in manipulation, but in genuine human connection. The desert facility continued its work. The network continued to rebuild. Director Winters moved her pieces across a global chessboard, and Lily watched, learned, prepared, because some stories never truly end. They simply wait to begin again.